The Gaggle challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:10 p.m. in, yes, dark, grim, cold Budapest. But I have to say, it is getting a little bit better. The days are a little longer. The sun, non-existent. But that you get a little bit more daylight, that does add to the sum total of human happiness, I guess. So my prognosis today is a little bit less grim and severe and depressing than it usually is. So that's something. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody who has joined me. This is now time for the Tuesday live stream, and there's a few things that caught my attention and be worth talking about. One thing that really is, I'll start on a kind of very trivial, maybe trivial. I mean, not so much trivial. I like to talk about the uselessness and ridiculousness of the media, and nothing illustrates the media's uselessness, ridiculousness, and pointlessness than all of these stories about Trump's supposedly seeking a third term. This is absolutely a ridiculous, the most ridiculous story ever. And it's entirely invented by the media. Trump's done nothing. Trump has done nothing at all to encourage anyone to think that he's seeking a third term. Whenever he's asked about this, all he does is say, well, people have suggested to me I seek a third term. That's all he says. But the media are pretending that somehow Trump is planning on running for a third term. Now, this makes it very, very stupid, because the journalists know very, very well that you cannot run for a third term according to the U.S. Constitution. The 22nd Amendment is very explicit that you may not seek the presidency more than twice. So there's no third term. Doesn't matter whether your terms were consecutive, as they are mostly, or non-consecutive, as they are in the case of Trump. You cannot seek it a third time, and they know this. So therefore, they know that the only way Trump could run for a third term is if the 22nd Amendment was changed. If there was a constitutional amendment. Now, a constitutional amendment is actually very, very difficult. You need 2/3 of both houses to agree to something. Something that's extremely unlikely in the case of Trump, who has the narrowest of margins in the House, and has 53 seats in the Senate. But then you need to get 3/4 of the states to agree to a constitutional amendment. This is very, very difficult, and almost certainly an impossibility for Trump. And the media well know this. So they're generating these stories in order to persuade the unsuspecting and somewhat dumb public to think that Trump is actually planning to set up a dictatorship, and that somehow he's not going to leave office. Because they know perfectly well that if Trump were to try to seek the presidency in 2028, the courts would immediately rule, no, you're in violation of the U.S. Constitution. You cannot do it. They know this perfectly well. That the courts will immediately rule. It's not even going to go up to the Supreme Court, because the courts will just say it's stated explicitly in the Constitution that you cannot seek the office of president more than twice. Or you can't be elected, whatever the phrasing exactly. You can't be elected to the presidency more than twice. So therefore, the reason they're bringing this up, and again, Trump hasn't said anything. Trump has never said that he intends to do this, is to get the public to think that he is going to set up a dictatorship. Because since they know that the courts will rule that Trump cannot seek the presidency, therefore the only way he can go on being president is if he just simply declares, well, I'm president for life. But if he's going to do that, then why even bring up the issue that he's going to run for a third time? I mean, if you're basically going to set up a dictatorship for life, then why even bother going through the motion of seeking the presidency again, getting an election? And I mean, apart from anything else, their belief, the purported belief of the media, that somehow Trump will be reelected, and therefore, if he were to seek the presidency again in 2028, he would win the election, which is amazing optimism or pessimism or whatever on the part of the media, that somehow he would win the election. So essentially, what they're really trying to say is, oh, he's going to set up a dictatorship and he'll be declared president for life. Well, if that's the case, then why even bring up the issue of his running for a third term? Because if you're just going to set up a president, I mean, they're saying that, oh, he's just going to ignore the courts, because the courts are going to rule that you can't run for another term. You've been president twice. You've had 2 terms. That's it. You can't run for another term. So what they're trying to suggest is that he will ignore the courts. But again, if he's going to ignore the courts, then why even bring up the issue of an election? You just simply ignore the courts, and he'll just say, well, I'm going to stay in the Oval Office in perpetuity. I mean, the idea is, of course, ludicrous. Trump didn't do that in 2021. He walked, even though he raised questions about the election, but nonetheless he walked. He didn't stay on and say, I'm still president. So it's a stupid story, and it's something that the media do all the time, which is they create absolutely fictional events, and events of no importance, just in order to get people very agitated, very excited. It's like clickbait. That's all they did. So they created this story out of nothing to suggest, and there are people don't really follow this that closely, but the 22nd Amendment, to suggest, oh, Trump is planning to be dictator for life. He's planning to stay on after the 2028 election. It's an absolutely idiotic thing, and this is exactly what we've become used to in the media. I mean, we spoke last time about that ridiculous story of that British journalist who was harassing Marjorie Taylor Greene about Signalgate. Something that Marjorie Taylor Greene had absolutely nothing to do with. She's not a member of the administration. She doesn't have anything to do with national security. She's a domestic affairs person. She was giving a news conference about the hearings that she had conducted about NPR and PBS. But then this British journalist said, well, she's going to harass Marjorie Taylor Greene over the chat on Signal between among Trump's national security people, and just went on and on and on, badgering Marjorie Taylor Greene, and therefore created a news story out of nothing. It's like somehow the journalists kind of make themselves the story. They create this out of nothing, and then later on in the day, they get interviewed on these various panel shows. Oh well, so what do you think of this serious situation of Trump planning to run for a third term? Well, this is clearly Trump doesn't have much respect for democracy, and so let's ask some Democrat congressman. Yeah, Trump clearly has no respect for democracy. He's clearly going to seek a third term. This is it. So you kind of created a story out of nothing. You're not doing anything as journalists are supposed to do. You're supposed to find something out, investigate something, highlight something that people didn't know. You're not just supposed to whip people up into a fervor on the basis of absolute idiocies, as this is. And as I say, you have to emphasize again and again, Trump has given no indication, none, that he intends to seek a third term. Well, he gets badgered. People keep asking him the same question. It's the way journalists always do. They keep asking the same question in the hope that they're going to get a different answer. The 105th time they've asked the same question, and he's never said, "I intend to run for another term." On the contrary, as he said during that press briefing on Air Force One the other day, he said, "Well, we still got almost 4 years ahead with this term. We've got a lot of work to do. Well, why should we waste time talking about what's going to happen in 2028?" So that's that stupid story, which just I always find this infuriating. Now, the couple of other things here nearer home, or at least nearer home for me, in Budapest. Big security out today because tomorrow Bibi Netanyahu is arriving for a 4-day visit. Now, there are a number of things that strike you right away. First off, how does Netanyahu get to take 4 days off? I mean, you would have thought there's plenty going on in Israel, what with the war in Gaza and all kinds of constitutional crises or whatever, his fights with the Supreme Court and so on. But nonetheless, he's going to be here for 4 days. And so he's arriving on Wednesday, and then I think he's leaving on Sunday. He has to stay the Sabbath here. Also, all of that is obviously being paid for because his entourage is traveling with him, so very substantial entourage. So it's all going to be paid for by Israeli taxpayers, because that's their problem. But nonetheless, it is interesting, and I mean, we've talked about this before. This alignment between Israel and the right in Europe and the right in the United States. It's because somehow that nationalist, populist right has embraced the cause of Israel as its own. That's very interesting. Why has it done that? I mean, part of it. I mean, obviously, there was the suspicions about Muslims, the growing presence of Muslims in Europe, the fear of the Muslims that they're going to create their own communities, states, fiefdoms inside Europe. Very legitimate fears, but again, that has nothing to do with Israel. That was corrupt, sleazy, disgusting, loathsome politicians in Europe, in the United Kingdom, that deliberately fueled mass immigration over many, many years. They deliberately fueled this to the point where, indeed, you're kind of having states within states with Muslims. Now, the right, the populist right, uses that to uh, to win elections, to gain power, to gain popularity, but they don't actually intend to do anything about it. I mean, that you have to kind of realize that all of these people, whether it's Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, or whether it's Marine Le Pen, or the National Rally. We can talk about Le Pen in a bit, but the National Rally. Um, what's them? The British guy, the sort of the Reform, Nigel Farage of Reform. They don't actually intend to do anything about it. This is just simply something that they bring up at election time. Nice, easy way to win votes, but nobody really thinks that there's going to be any kind of mass removal of immigrants. I mean, there might be some curtailing, but even there isn't a great deal of curtailing of mass immigration. But the problem that that have now that you've got millions of migrants in these countries is how you got to do something to change the demographic. Otherwise, you really are just going to have I don't know whether you could say Balkanization, or you can say the Lebanonization of a number of states. The UK and France is just going to be kind of Lebanon. You're going to create vast Muslim communities, and they have their agendas, and they're going to act as a Muslim bloc, and then you're going to have blocks of Sikhs, and you'll have African blocks, and then essentially it's going to become you've got to created a country comprising different ethnic blocks, all of whom demand power. I think that's obviously where a number of European states are heading. So you can see why the some of these right-wing populist parties in Europe look to Israel as a model. So in part, they think of Israel as this ethno-nationalist state. That somehow they have this Jewish identity, and they always insist on their Jewish identity in this very vigorous, aggressive way. And up against them are these Muslim extremists. There's these whether it's Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood. It's this these Islamic crazies. So you can see why they would find common cause with Israel. But Israel has gone out of its way to cultivate the right, the European right. They had a conference recently in Jerusalem on anti-Semitism. Well, that's nice. You can have a conference on anti-Semitism, and present at this conference were various representatives of the European right. You had representatives from the Vox Party in Spain. You had from Jordan Bardella of the National Rally was there. There were people representing Hungary's Fidesz were there. Now you got within Israel you got the liberal Israeli opinion that purports to be very perturbed by this, but they don't really count very much, because ultimately much of what they are about, to be honest, is just they just hate Netanyahu. I mean that they're generally very ineffectual, because they know they don't really care that much about the fundamental issues. They just don't like Netanyahu. I mean there's these Israeli kind of opposition or whatever you would call them. They kind of remind you a little bit of the Democrats in the United States, where you say, well, what's your agenda? They don't really have an agenda. They just don't like Trump. They just hate Trump. So in the same way, when you look at the Israeli political scene, you read these Israeli kind of liberal media like Haaretz, and you want to know, okay, well, what's Haaretz's position on the two-state solution? What's Haaretz's position on the idea of making Israel a kind of ethno-nationalist state, the state of the Jews? Um, and you look and look, and you don't really see it. You just all you get is they hate Netanyahu, and so they, because Netanyahu has been encouraging this alliance with the right, the European right, and of course with the American right. Well, they're against it, but there's nothing principled about it. I mean, they just don't like Netanyahu. But it was so, but they never really get to you when you want to know. Okay, well, that's great. You don't like Netanyahu, fine. What's your take on the two-state solution? I mean, is that still viable? I mean, and if you think it's viable, what should be done to get to a two-state solution? Well, when it comes to that, either they don't really address the issue, or they subscribe to the Netanyahu's banalities. Well, before we get to a two-state solution, we need to destroy Hamas. Okay, so you're basically supporting Netanyahu. Oh yeah, you've got to destroy Hamas, whatever that means. So, but this alliance. And you'd have to say, Netanyahu plays his hand very shrewdly. I mean, it is quite interesting in that he's kind of aligned himself to this political grouping that may be on the rise and may come to with some success um, in Europe, which is namely the right, and somehow has persuaded the European right, which after all used to be quite hostile to Israel. Didn't particularly was suspicious of Israel, you know, suspicious of Jewish power and money and so on. But now the right is embraced the cause of Israel. It loves Israel. And Netanyahu, there's an ICC arrest warrant out on Netanyahu. So Hungary is a signatory of the Rome Treaty. So in theory, Hungary should arrest Bibi Netanyahu in accordance with its obligations under the Rome Statute. But it's not going to do it. And Orban has said he's not going to do it. So that's so much for that. So much for the whole ICC. Now, as you know, I'm extremely skeptical of the ICC. I despise the ICC, and I think it's absolutely ridiculous. And in the normal circumstances, I would say, yeah, I mean, Hungary is absolutely right in not arresting the the leader of Israel. I mean, it's just not up. It's none of the ICC's business. It's not a real court. Has no real jurisdiction. It has no real international legal standing. It's a fiction. It just so happens that it was a fiction created by NATO, the EU, the usual cast of suspects, the Western powers, who saw the ICC as being this very useful tool to impose its will on the rest of the world. But Hungary, as a member of all of these institutions, was basically is under some obligation to carry out its will. If it's not going to do that, if Hungary just said, "Well, we're not going to arrest Netanyahu," on the contrary, he's our guest, and we're really very happy to have him, and we like him a great deal, then the obvious thing to do is to leave the Rome Statute. Is you withdraw from the Rome Statute and say that you just don't accept the ICC anymore. But this is classic Orbanism. I mean, he wants to present himself as this intrepid nationalist. Europe of states. I believe in sovereignty. I believe in the national independence of states. Hungary is sovereign. Hungary is independent. Hungary doesn't take orders from anyone. Every public holiday in Hungary, whether it's recently there was March the 15th, which commemorated the Hungary's uprising against the Habsburgs in 1848, or whether it's August the 20th, which commemorates Hungary's establishment as a state, or whether it's October the 23rd, when Hungary commemorates its uprising against the Soviets in 1956. Each time, each of these public holidays, Orban makes the same speech. We Hungarians, we pride ourselves on our freedom, our independence, and we have risen up against all of the rulers, whether it's the Turks, whether it's the Habsburgs, whether it's the Russians, and now we are rising up against Brussels. That always leads up to that same crescendo that we're now fighting against Brussels. We're not going to take the rule of Brussels. But the point is, Hungary is taking the rule of Brussels. Hungary has to follow the rule of Brussels, because Hungary is a member of NATO. Hungary is a member of the EU. Hungary has to do as it's told. So it's really quite pointless. It makes for a nice speech, and this is really the problem with the European right, as I say, with Orban or Farage. Or anyways, they talk a good game, but in the end, they don't really deliver. I mean, Hungary basically has gone along with all of the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia, and Hungary's gone along with all of the aid and more than has been sent to Ukraine. Now, Hungary grumbles and doesn't like this and doesn't like that, but basically goes along with it. And so the same thing applies here with the International Criminal Court. If you despise the International Criminal Court and you don't think you're under any obligation in accordance with the Rome Statute to arrest somebody who has been indicted by the ICC, if you don't think that, then you should leave the ICC and say you don't want to have anything to do with that. But to continue being a member of the ICC and hang out and wine and dine with Bibi is just looks ridiculous. But that's the line again from this nationalist populist right. And I've talked before about this guy Hazoni, who kind of has invented this national conservatism. Amazing, a national conservatism, and they have these lavishly funded conferences. They have one in Brussels, they have them in the United States, and all of the sort of usual conservatives, they all go there. Told, oh yeah, we're conservatives. We believe in the nation state. We believe in national sovereignty. We believe in independence, and so on. And you think, well, that's very strange. Why is it that this is being funded from Israel? I mean, why is national conservatism getting funded from Israel? What why what's the agenda here? And that's really been this operation to persuade the right, the international right, that somehow their cause and the cause of Israel is one and the same. And that's why Bibi is going to be in Hungary and celebrate in Hungary. Now, the other thing about Hungary is that it's embraced this kind of philo-Semitism, a very strange phenomenon. I mean, like I guess it's always very odd when people embrace a cause, a religion, or which isn't really their own. But you come across this here all the time of Hungarian non-Jews um, sort of celebrating Jewish holidays. Where again, it's a sort of the strange kind of thing. If you're not Jewish, um, why are you celebrating Yom Kippur? I mean, but that's become Hungary now. Hungary did have a problem in the past with anti-Semitism. There's no question they had a problem with anti-Semitism. Um, it, I mean, obviously there was, in Hungary as elsewhere, there was there's some bad feelings towards the Jews before World War One, but what really fueled the most intense anti-Semitism, which starting in the 1920s, was the Hungarian Soviet Republic of 1919, the so-called Tanács Köztársaság, because that communist dictatorship they were mostly Jews. It was led by Jews, and it was very easy to go from there to blame the Jews for that. But what I've always found very strange about the Hungarian approach to that is that whatever you can say about those communists, I mean, they were obviously, they did a lot of foolish things, but nonetheless, they were patriotic. They did fight to preserve Greater Hungary. I mean, they went and fought. They defeated the Czechoslovaks. They lost to the Romanians, but they did fight to preserve the historic borders of Hungary. They did not succeed, but they did attempt to do this. Now, the sort of the Hungarian aristocracy, they didn't do any of that. So the Hungarian aristocrats who resented, disliked these Jews, they just basically sat on their hands and allowed all these different ethnic groups to take pieces of Hungary. But not the communists. I mean, the communists actually tried to preserve this Hungary, the historic Hungary. Now, what then happened is, of course, we had the Treaty of Trianon in 1920, and Hungary lost 2/3 of its territory. But none of that had anything to do with the Jews. So it was very strange that somehow the Jews got blamed for this, and then somehow it was transmuted into a kind of a hatred for the Soviet Union. But the Soviet Union had nothing to do with Trianon. Lenin, the Bolsheviks really had nothing to do with Trianon. If you want to blame anyone for Trianon, you have to blame it on the English and the French. but somehow Hungary, out of some um, misplaced loathing for the Soviet Union, took part in the invasion of the Soviet Union alongside Hitler. Um, he didn't really have to do that, but he did it. He did it because of some real ideological opposition and I guess some resentment over Trianon. But it's a very odd aspect of it, that this pro-Western feeling in Hungary. Well, it's the Western powers that basically took away 2/3 of your country. Wasn't a communist, wasn't the Soviet Union, wasn't Lenin, wasn't my great uncle. It was the Western powers. They took away 2/3 of your country, um, and so it's, it's and out of this foolish operation to invade the Soviet Union in 1941. Well, Hungary ended up on the losing side. Well, if you end up on the losing side of a war, you get thumped. You get beaten over the head. Um, and Hungary did end up on the losing side of World War II, and its punishment was 40 years of communism, which, and as I pointed this out many times, wasn't that bad after the rule of the sort of Stalinists came to an end in 56. The sort of the Kada regime really wasn't that terrible. However, it had to happen. I mean, if you invade the Soviet Union as an ally of Hitler's, you are going to get punished. And the communist rule, the 40 years of communist rule was the punishment. But the strange thing is that the Hungarians never acknowledge this. They still routinely come along, and Orban does this, denouncing the communists and the Russians and so on. And you think, well, um, what are you going? What would you expect? What's going to happen? I mean, it's like this is, uh, you know, you were on the losing side of the war, and the Soviets, when at least the Soviet Union was in existence, the Soviets were not going to just let you go so that you can then join NATO and resume your intense anti-communism and your intense anti-Soviet feeling, which is clearly what would have happened in 56. Um, but that's the strange kind of what is it? Essay Delendam says George is a bit too morally blasé on murder and high crime. Am I? I don't know. Well, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I mean, I try to be. I wouldn't say I was morally blasé. I'd say I try to be realistic. Um, Mearsheimer, everybody's hero Mearsheimer tries to be. But Mearsheimer never strikes me as being particularly realistic. He seems to get very emotional when he wants to. So I try not to be too emotional. I just simply call things out for to what they are. But anyway, so that's Netanyahu, who will be in Budapest on Wednesday, and therefore, when we do the live stream on Thursday, we will deal with the Netanyahu visit. So the other thing that strikes me as being a little odd is that today there's this hearing in Washington on the Kennedy assassination. Now, the Kennedy assassination, it really gets weirder and weirder. That here we are now with 61, it's more than 61 years on since the assassination. Um, Meg Galucci says, I was in Hungary in 1973, and it appeared normal to me as a young person. Prague, however, was disaster and scary to a young person. Well, that's very astute. That's a very astute observation, because 1973, um, Hungary was a kind of fairly liberal, by communist standards, by liberal, tolerant place, because um, he kind of adopted this policy of um, if you're not against us, you're with us. It's the opposite of love. If you're not with us, you're against us. But he says, if you're not against us, you're with us. If you don't actively oppose us, then we will regard you as an ally. And that made life quite tolerable, because as long as you didn't go out of your way to oppose the government, the government left you alone. And so that made Hungary a quite tolerable place. Again, the Hungarians now go on, oh, it was so terrible, 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 terrible. But it really wasn't. And at the time, Hungarians did not say that it was so terrible. That whatever they may say now, they did not think at the time that it was terrible. Now, the pre 1956 Hungarian communists, that's a different case. I mean, that was pretty harsh. But the Kada government, I mean, that was that really wasn't that bad, and essentially it was predicated on the assumption that there was nothing that could be done. Moscow had made it clear in 56 that they were not going to accept Hungary leaving the Warsaw Pact. They were not going to accept Hungary departing from the Soviet sphere of influence. It wasn't going to happen. That was what 56 was about. However, as long as Hungary accepted that, then in terms of its domestic policy, the Moscow was reasonably tolerant. And I think Hungarians understood this, and Kada knew that the Hungarians understood this, and that's why there really wasn't that much trouble during Kada time. Hungarians were allowed to travel; they could travel abroad, which wasn't at all common in the rest of Eastern Europe, but Hungarians could. Czechoslovakia. Well, as you say, Meg, I mean, that was a different case, because 73 was just 5 years after the Prague Spring, the crushing of the Prague Spring. So things were quite nasty at that time. I mean, there was a real crackdown on everybody who was involved in the Prague Spring. I mean, they were all being basically purged. So yeah, 73 was not a good time in Czechoslovakia. So yeah, that's right. Anyway, so going back to this hearing today in Washington on the Kennedy assassination, and it's being organized by this Luna, this Anne-Marie Luna, I think that's her name, is this congresswoman, Republican congresswoman. I think she's from Florida. I find the whole thing just absolutely bizarre. I mean, I know there are people. I'm sure there are among Gagglers who believe the various conspiracies about the Kennedy assassination. I don't. I really don't. I think we knew very early on the basic outlines of the story. Oswald had been a communist. He had attempted to defect to the Soviet Union. He was denied. Initially, the Soviets denied it. Then he attempted to commit suicide while he was in Moscow. I guess the Soviets were persuaded by this suicide attempt. I mean, up until then, they probably thought he was an agent provocateur, and that's why they said no, they're not going to accept his defection. But then he attempted to commit suicide, so they accepted him. Then he lived for a while in Minsk with a Russian wife for several years. Obviously, he was under Soviet observation, and then he returned to the United States. But he never abandoned. I mean, his politics. I mean, he was a communist. He had attempted to assassinate General Edwin Walker, the John Birch Society. He was obviously very agitated about the Kennedy attempts to overthrow Fidel Castro, the attempts to murder Castro, and all the whole Kennedy policy against Cuba. I mean, he was opposed to all of that. And I think he was the assassin. The theories that have been presented over the years. I mean, the initial theory is whether somehow this was the far right in the United States that tried to kill Kennedy, or there was the mafia. I mean, obviously the Soviets themselves were. People have argued the Soviets did it, and then we had Oliver Stone, who's testifying today, incidentally, on Capitol Hill at this committee. Oliver Stone, he said it was the Pentagon, the generals who did it. They've got now the Luna, I guess, and the various people like Tucker Carlson, Ron Paul. They point the finger at the CIA, and then of course you have the point is that somebody says, "A simpleton's you, ignorant of evidence to the contrary." There is no evidence to the contrary. That's the point. It's a fiction. There's no evidence. The point is this: you've had 60 years. You've had 60 years of I don't know how many investigations and whatever, and no one has been able to present a halfway plausible case that that anybody else did it. Basically, okay, the mafia did it. All right, fine. Now give us the evidence. Present us the evidence, how it was done, who did it, who ordered it. Just give me the mechanics. All right. So then you say, no, it wasn't the mafia. You say it was the Pentagon did it. Okay, who did it? Who are you going to say did it? And then now we have the Israel thing. Oh, it was Israel. And why? Because Kennedy objected to Israel's nuclear program. All right, Kennedy objected to it. Why would Israel kill Kennedy because of that? Kennedy would have probably come round eventually as America. I mean, Americans were not happy in the 1950s, and they knew about this, that Israel was developing nuclear weapons. They weren't very happy about it, but there was really nothing very much that they could do about it, because already by then the Israeli lobby was becoming quite powerful, and there's there was basically it was a fait accompli. So Kennedy did attempt half-heartedly, not to stop the program. He didn't try to, but at least he said, can we at least go to Dimona and inspect what the hell you're doing? And of course the Israelis said, no, you can't. You can't come to Dimona. And that was that. And even if Kennedy had remained alive, the Israelis would have got around Kennedy in the way they got around all of the other political leaders, in the way they got around Johnson and the way they got around Nixon. They would have fobbed him off with all sorts of promises, and so on. There's no reason to kill him. If you kill a president, you are running serious risks. That is one dangerous activity. The point I'm making is that it's one thing to start poking holes in the Warren Commission report. I mean, anyone can do that. That's very easy. You can always say, oh, this, whatever. I mean, you can always poke holes in it. That's not good enough. What you need to do is to present an alternative hypothesis. Remember, we have got a story. We have the story of Oswald. We know a great deal about Oswald. All everything. His biography. All his trip to Moscow. Then his trip to Mexico City. His attempt to enter the Cuban embassy in Mexico City. He came back to the United States. His attempts to assassinate General Edwin Walker. All this we know. And then, the school depository building and everything else. Okay, so we have that. Somebody then has to come along. If you're going to argue that there was a conspiracy to kill Kennedy, or whoever, it was the CIA or Israel or the mafia or right-wing extremists or anyone else, then give us the evidence and give us a plausible account of how this was done. Poking holes in the Warren Commission report, I'm afraid, just isn't going to cut it. And I think that's and above all, I've never understood really the reason for it. That's always been the problem, that if you're going to say Kennedy was assassinated, then you have to think, well, what's the reason for it? What I mean, when you assassinate political leaders, there's usually a reason. I mean, it's a serious thing. It's done. It absolutely has been done. Political leaders getting assassinated, but it's usually because a political leader was threatening something or other. But Kennedy wasn't threatening anything. Kennedy was a fairly moderate, a subscriber to all of the Cold War ideas. He wasn't particularly fanatical about the Cold War, but he was a Cold Warrior. He was in favor of fighting in Vietnam. He was in favor of coups in various third world countries to overthrow pro-communist. Well, they weren't even pro-communist. Lefty leaders. Any leader who wasn't sufficiently anti-communist, he was in favor of all of that. There's no evidence at any stage that somehow Kennedy said, I think this is wrong. I really don't think the CIA should be in the business of killing Lumumba in Congo. No, he never said that. Oh, I don't think I think it's wrong, to kill Castro. On the contrary, he ordered the CIA to try to overthrow Castro, to basically make life as awful as possible in Cuba. And then we have the pièce de résistance, the final damning evidence of why the CIA was behind it, is that Kennedy was said he wants to break up the CIA into 1,000 little pieces and let the wind just blow them away. Whoa, that's it. The CIA killed him because Kennedy said he wants to break up the CIA into 1,000 little pieces and let the wind blow the pieces away. Well, here's the problem. Kennedy never said it. There's been no evidence has ever been presented that Kennedy ever said this. This was attributed to Kennedy by an unnamed, anonymous official who allegedly heard Kennedy say this. This was reported in the New York Times in 1966, in an article in 66, and said, there was an anonymous official overheard Kennedy say this. Now, let's say it's true. Let's say Kennedy. Let's even assume that that's true. Again, there's no evidence, because no one has ever been able to uncover any statement that Kennedy made in public, or anybody had actually who can put, with a known person who had heard Kennedy say this, Arthur Schlesinger or Ted Sorensen or any of the people, J.K. Galbraith, all the people who were around Kennedy. None of them has ever said, yeah, I heard him say that. But let's say he did say that. He's alleged to have said this after the Bay of Pigs debacle. So what does that tell us? That tells us that he was frustrated after the Bay of Pigs debacle. Basically he felt that the CIA bungled it, and that's a reasonable inference for him to make. I mean, they did this. The CIA had been planning this for a long time. The planning began under the Eisenhower administration, and then Kennedy inherited this. But Kennedy signed off on this. So this was April 1961. Kennedy had signed off on this invasion. CIA had assured him that it would be successful, and they assured him, oh, well, the Cubans will rise up. The moment, this invading force of Cuban exiles would land, the Cuban people would rise up and overthrow Castro. Well, they didn't. They didn't rise up at all, and the exiles, organized, trained by the CIA, were easily defeated. So if you're the president, you're angry, you're frustrated. But it's not. I mean, it's not the first time Americans have been bemused by these kind of ridiculous assumptions that we'll launch an invasion and the people will rise up and welcome us with open arms. They'll throw flowers at us. Well, let me think. Isn't that the expectation in 2003 with the invasion of Iraq? Oh, the Iraqis will all welcome the invading army. So that's what they thought. The Americans thought. Right? Well, CIA thought this. Kennedy, he didn't know. He just accepted what the CIA told him. But he approved. He approved of this operation. And then, of course, after the operation, he was angry because it was a very bad look. After all, the invading force started in the United States. I mean, everyone can see. And so while Kennedy tried to distance himself from the invasion, I mean, you can't distance yourself from the invasion if the invading force starts out in Florida and then goes to Cuba, and it gets easily defeated by the Cuban armed forces. So he's obviously angry, and he took out his anger on Allen Dulles. If he fired Allen Dulles, now that's what happens. I mean, that's what presidents do. I mean, it's a bungled operation, so you fire the head man. But Kennedy, in no way did he think that those, in principle, that he opposed the invasion of Cuba. I mean, he didn't oppose this. He just thought it was bungled, and the president of the United States had to carry the can. All the condemnations of the world were heaped upon him for having essentially signed off on this ridiculous adventure. So that's why he expressed this frustration in which, if indeed he had said this, and as I say, there's no evidence that he did say this, that he wants to break the CIA up into 1,000 little pieces. But what did he do after the failure of the Bay of Pigs? He launched this Operation Mongoose, which was all about assassinating Castro and trying to create as much chaos as possible within Cuba. And he used all the mafia. There were still mafia elements within Cuba. I mean, the mafia was very strong, had been very strong in Cuba in the Batista era, and there were remnants of the mafia still in Cuba. He tried to use that in order to assassinate Castro. So there's nothing here. There's nothing in this record to suggest that Kennedy in any way had heterodox views about the Cold War or anything else. He wanted to make nice with Castro. He wanted to make nice with the communists. Now, it's true that he made that famous last speech. Well, it wasn't quite his last, but it was in June 1963 when he made that speech at the American University. But that was after the the Cuban Missile Crisis, which he, was had kind of brought on himself by the stationing of these the Jupiter missiles in Italy and Turkey, which he had to have known the Soviets would take strong objection to, and that the Soviets would then retaliate by stationing medium range missiles in the proximity of the United States. But nonetheless, there was a Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy handled that pretty well, and of course, once it was over, naturally, you know, he, Kennedy, and others, breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Well, we really can't go down this path again. We need to work something out. We have to sort of see, if we have some kind of a modus vivendi." Um, and the essay Delendam says Mongoose, yeah, Operation Mongoose. That was and it was this Operation Mongoose, which Oswald obviously knew about, and this is kind of what drove him to this to wanting to kill Kennedy. So I don't the CIA angle. I just don't see why the CIA would want to kill him. Now, if the CIA felt that they were let down by Kennedy, this whole story that Kennedy didn't provide air support to the invading force, well, that wasn't really part of the plan. I mean, Kennedy wanted to kind of have it both ways, support the invasion, but he didn't really want to have it seem as if the Americans were really, the U.S. government was actually involved in this invasion. So he kind of wanted, well, yeah, you can invade, but we're not going to use the U.S. Armed forces directly in this invasion, so we won't provide air support for the invading force. That's how Kennedy did it. Now, it's debatable that about really what he should have done, or whether the air support would have made any difference. I doubt whether the air support would have actually turned the tide in favor of the invading forces. But even if the CIA believed this, if the CIA believed, Kennedy let us down during the Bay of Pigs invasion, even if they believe that, that was already 2.5 years ago. I mean, that was 2.5 years earlier. What's the point of assassinating a president 2.5 years later? That's just ancient history. What happened then. There's so many things have gone on since April 1961, so that doesn't even make any sense why they would do something, a revenge killing of Kennedy because of the failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion. So Meg Gallucci says that was a good speech. It was a good speech. The American University speech was a very good speech. It was one of Kennedy's best. But you keep in mind that was a conciliatory and a kind of détente speech, very, very different from the kind of speeches that he had given. I mean, if you go back to his inaugural address, whatever, bear any burden, fight any foe, that was a real call to arms against the communists. I mean, this was, you had Eisenhower. He leaves the country with his farewell address, talking about the military-industrial complex, and then in comes Kennedy with a call to arms, kind of mobilizing the country to fight the communists. So, and then finally, once he saw this, how dangerous the dangerous course that this was taking, he gives us a much more conciliatory speech with the American University. Now, would that have set the agenda for for the rest of his term. Well, I don't know. That was just one speech. That was in June 1963. That was you can't just simply say, well, that his uh, the administration would have pursued that path. But it's quite possible that it would have done. But because détente now became, essentially the credos of the United States. I mean, like, and really from then on, from the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962 on through to the late 1970s. And the United States pursued the policy of détente. I mean, they still had the containment policy, but it was a policy of détente, of arms control agreements, and to try to work with the Soviet Union to mitigate the consequences of crisis. Try to work with the Soviet Union on Southeast Asia, try to work with the Soviet Union in the Middle East. It was a very different line from the previous policy. But the record is that Kennedy was a very conventional Cold Warrior, pursued very conventional Cold War policies, including escalation in Vietnam. Again, you remember, he escalated from what the policy had been under Eisenhower and Nixon. Eisenhower and Nixon generally, had gone out of their way not to, increase unnecessarily American involvement in Vietnam and in Laos, and in Cambodia. They say, well, just try to restrain the level of American involvement. But Kennedy ran in 1960. Let's get this country moving again. We've got to fight the communists. The communists are winning. Remember the missile gap. We're losing the world to Khrushchev. Khrushchev's declared these wars of national liberation. The third world is moving to the Soviet Union. We've got to do something. We've got to be much more energetic and proactive. America had been asleep during the Eisenhower years. That was the Kennedy program. That's how he won in the 1960 election, and he followed through with that. So, I mean, long story short, there's no reason why the CIA or the Pentagon would have been unhappy with anything Kennedy had done. Not to mention that Kennedy had ordered this massive buildup, the nuclear missile buildup. So that's why it's strange that so many people, whether it's Tucker Carlson, Ron Paul, Robert Barnes, Viva Fry, and all these people have embraced this idea that the CIA killed Kennedy. They've never presented any evidence of this or any reason why the CIA would have wanted to kill Kennedy. But it sounds good. Oh, CIA killed Kennedy. Oh. That's what terrible people they are. The CIA did indeed do all sorts of so Paris says, I think David Talbot has made a good case that the JFK was in an internal war with his hardliners. Well, I mean, but that goes on within any administration. There were hardliners within the national security orbit, and it was particularly the case with during the Cuban Missile Crisis. You remember during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the consensus among Kennedy's national security advisors was that the United States should invade Cuba and dismantle the missiles. That was the consensus. They suggested that that's what the United States should do. And Kennedy, because after all, he's the president and he was the one who was going to carry the can. I mean, he's the one who I think was the moderate on this issue, and said that no, well, I think that's a serious step to invade Cuba and dismantle the missiles. Let's see if we can work things out diplomatically. And that prevailed. And so yes, it is true that among the national security advisors, they were all much more hardline than Kennedy himself, and that is understandable. I mean, if you're the president and you're the one who's going to be making these decisions about war and peace, and particularly the chances of a nuclear war, then you're going to try and postpone any dangerous, reckless decision for as long as you can. So that's why he didn't take the advice of the national security advisors and said, no, we're not going to invade Cuba. We'll see if we can resolve this diplomatically. Now, so that's that, and then I don't know what's going to happen at this hearing, but it'll have Oliver Stone there, and so you get a bit of Hollywood glamour there, and so. But I mean, if you remember the Oliver Stone movie, and it was a well-made movie. There's no question of well-made, but the thesis he argued was just a ridiculous one. It was there's no evidence for it. I mean, like we saw the film that he did of Nixon. I mean, it was all just simply bung everything into a kind of a big pot of stew, and because everything seems very sinister and dark, and all kinds of dark figures appear and so on, so it'll persuade the public that he's uncovering something dark. But in that film, he subscribed to to this Jim Garrison, this ridiculous Louisiana district attorney. His case was ridiculous. It was a ridiculous case, and the jury. This was a jury. The jury came back in about 15 minutes, because Garrison brought a case against some people, half a dozen people, and the jury came back within about 15 minutes and said, threw this case out. I mean, there's just you don't have any evidence. But somehow Stone decided to make Jim Garrison, played by Kevin Costner, the hero of this story. So somebody said, Oliver Stone sounded like Joe Biden at the hearing. Well, so you've seen it. So I haven't. As S.A. Dillon says, I saw Stone talk about it in person. Yeah, I've seen him talk about it also in person, and I've never been persuaded by it. And I thought, he's a filmmaker, and he wants to make money. And indeed, I remember. I remember when the film came out, was I think 1991, and he came under a lot of attack at the time, and he kind of defended himself by saying, "Well, I'm just making a work of fiction. This is a film. This is entertainment. I never said that I'm writing a work of history. I'm just making a film. I'm just presenting an interpretation." So this is what they always do. These people always do is that. I mean, look, I like Oliver Stone. I mean, he's done some good things. I mean, those interviews that he did with Putin, I think, were really interesting. And he's made those movies about Ukraine that were pretty good. So he's done good things. But I didn't think that was a good thing, the JFK, and I didn't think the Nixon film was good. I think he was making money, and I think he admitted it when he defended himself. Well, I'm just making a work of entertainment. I'm trying to do something that's really commercially successful. The film was commercially successful, but the people who somehow knew a little bit about the assassination immediately attacked his film. but fundamentally, I mean, it was really about you try making some money. I mean, when I said people like this do this, it's like the various comedians who do all these stupid things. They're talking about Trump or whatever, and then when people challenge them and say, "Well, actually, what you're saying is complete nonsense," you say, "Hey, well, I'm just a comedian. I never said I'm a historian. I never said I'm a political scientist. I'm just here to make some money." So it's a kind of get out of jail free card. So hey, 1 minute you're telling what you think happened with Kennedy, quite explosive, and then when historians or experts challenge you, oh, well, I'm just a filmmaker. Why are you berating me? I never said that. I'm an academic historian. Um, um, so Barry says Alan Dulles was appointed to the Warren Commission. That's pretty suspicious because he was fired by JFK. Well, yes, he was fired by JFK, but nonetheless, obviously there was going to be an important part of the Warren Commission, a very important part of the Warren Commission was the CIA, because the CIA had monitored Oswald, had known a great deal about Oswald. I mean, from the moment that Oswald went to Moscow, attempted to commit suicide, then defected, then lived in Moscow, lived in Minsk, married a Russian woman who, incidentally, whose father was a general, kind of a fairly senior figure within the Soviet leadership. So therefore, he was somebody that was being observed by the CIA. So since the CIA was obviously going to play a role in the Warren Commission's investigation, it made sense to bring on Alan Dulles. So whoever you were going to bring on as a kind of an expert on intelligence would in some ways be an interested party, since they had interacted with Kennedy. So anyway, that was that. And then tomorrow is, what is it? Liberation Day. We're going to have the tariffs. Trump is going to talk about the tariffs, so that's going to be quite interesting. I guess we'll talk about that on on Thursday. The tariffs. I mean, as you know, I mean, I think there are people, Gagglers, who don't agree with me on tariffs. I don't see any particular problems. Whether they succeed or don't succeed, that's a different issue. But in principle, I see no problem with tariffs, and as a tax, it's a much more palatable tax for me than an income tax. An income tax I find objectionable in all sorts of ways, because that is absolute theft of your labor. I mean, the government is stealing your labor. 50% of your labor is just stolen by the government, and you don't have any say in the matter. And if you refuse to cough up the money that the government demands of you, you go to prison. Now that's a really objectionable tax, much more so than others, like a sales tax. I mean, the sales tax are pretty objectionable, but at least you can adjust your behavior accordingly, whether you want to pay this kind of tax to the government or you don't. But the import tax is, I think, the least objectionable, because let's say they hit cognac with a tax. Okay, so cognac is going to cost more money. All right, well, cognac is going to cost more money. All right, well, then you can make a decision. Do you want to pay more money for cognac, or you want to switch to some other drink? If you like cognac, I think you're going to pay more. If you like champagne, you're going to pay more for the champagne. You're not going to switch over to American made sparkling wine, because it's just not the same thing. So, but the point is that you're still going to have a choice as to whether you want to pay this tax or you don't. So that's why I think, well, I find it difficult. You got the hysteria about tariffs, which are just taxes on imports, when people are just absolutely, have no problem at all with income taxes. It's just, like, oh, that's fine. The government takes half of my earnings, and God only knows what they're going to do with it. And if I don't pay, I go to prison. Oh, that's fine. I don't have any problem there. But with an import tax, I can make my own decisions, and that's whether I'm going to pay this or not. And so, well, I'm not going to pay this money for a German car. I think I'm going to buy an American car. Okay, and that's it. So you're not going to pay the tax. And I think that's um, was it Essie Dillendam says George compatriot theorized the most intelligent tax. Nicky Caldo. Oh wow, you know about Nicky Caldo. Wow, that's very impressive that you know about Nicky Caldo. Yeah, that was those were the two Hungarian economic advisors to the Labour government of the 1960s. Harold Wilson's favorite economic advisors were these two Hungarian economists, Nicky Kaldor and Thomas Balogh. And there are all sorts of stories about how they would be, in the cabinet room. I don't know if that's true, cabinet room, and then the two of them would start speaking in Hungarian. So nobody could understand what what they were saying. But I'm kind of, I'm impressed that you remember Nicky Kaldor. Anyway, let's take a look at our Gaggle locals page. These are the people who who provide money for the dogs. Even like, as Peter pointed out yesterday, these dogs, they look cute individually. You have a cute dog, but when they're hunting in packs, then they're quite terrifying. And so therefore, when the tip jar issue comes up, and they get angry because there's nothing in the tip jar, then they come after me. And in a pack, I can take one of them. I'm big enough and strong enough to take one of them, but I can't take all four of them. So that's where it gets difficult. And so that's why I'm always pressing on Gagglers to put more into the tip jar, because otherwise these hounds are just going to tear me from limb to limb. Anyway, let's take a look at the Gagglers. And so here is a question from Shopronka. Okay, welcome, Shopronka. And she says, I think she. I think because I'm just saying she because it ends in an A at the end, so I said it's a she. Okay, dear George, please could you throw some light on the situation surrounding President Dodik? Yesterday, Preeti Patel asked an urgent question in the Commons about Bosnia and Herzegovina. I need someone like you to explain what. Now let's see if I can be okay. Oh, yeah. All right. Let me, because I mean I can talk about Dodik, but I want to take a look at what the question was, so I can then say something. Preeti Patel, urgent question to ask the second blah blah if he will make a statement on her government's his Majesty's government's response to the political situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And Stephen Doughty says, I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her question about an issue that is very important to the government and to many members across the whole House. We strongly condemn the secessionist moves by the Republika Srpska President Milorad Dodik, which seriously threaten the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Such actions are unconstitutional, dangerous, blah, blah. The UK, as one of the signatories, remains fully committed to the Dayton Peace Agreement, which protects the authorities of both entities. And then it says, on Wednesday, the 26th of February, the court of Bosnia and Herzegovina found Republika Srpska Dodik guilty, blah, blah. And then it goes on. In the last few weeks, I've spoken to the Bosnian foreign minister, blah, blah, reaffirming the UK government's full support for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Bosnia and Herzegovina. the UK special envoy named Karen Pierce. Oh God, she was that horrible creature who used to be Britain's ambassador to the UN, reiterated that message. We welcome blah blah, and then Priti Patel returns to the subject. I thank the minister for his remarks. Attempts to undermine Bosnia and Herzegovina's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and by extension, the Dayton peace agreements, are deeply troubling. Over many years, the UK has been a reliable supporter of Bosnia and Herzegovina's democratic and pluralistic journey, and a trusted promoter when it comes to security. Okay, so blah blah. Um, um, and then she said, I know that the minister has spoken with this foreign minister, but what is the UK doing in practical terms, both to support Bosnia and Herzegovina to stay the course and maintain stability, and to defend and to promote freedom and democracy in the region? For the reasons that the minister outlined, the issue is pivotal. All right. I don't think we need to go on for much more of this. It seems fairly predictable crap. Look, the fact was, Bosnia and Herzegovina was a state entirely created by the Western powers, which encouraged the breakup of Yugoslavia. They said, no, we can't have Yugoslavia because the SFRY, and then it was the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, is a prison house of nations. You can't force these people to live together. We have to recognize the secession of the individual republics. So then they rushed to recognize it. But there was a problem with Bosnia and Herzegovina, because there really wasn't any dominant nation within Bosnia and Herzegovina. So it was already outrageous what happened in Croatia, because in Croatia, though the Croats were the majority nation there was still a very substantial Serbian minority, and the constitution had said that basically the Republic of Croatia is a creation of the two nations of the Serbs and the Croats. In other words, no one can do anything, no one can change the constitution, no one can change the status of the Republic of Croatia without the approval of both nations. And that was, of course, that was ignored. Tudjman, this Croatian nationalist Tudjman, he changed the constitution, threw the Serbs out of the constitution, and said basically Croatia was the republic of this one nation, of this national group, which was the Croats, and that way they could just ignore the Serbs, and therefore Croatia seceded from Yugoslavia. So that was already bad enough, but what they did in Bosnia and Herzegovina was particularly objectionable, because the Muslims were only about 43% of the population. The Serbs were something like 33% of the population, and then you had the Croats, which were about 15% of the population. Now, the problem was that in Bosnia and Herzegovina, you had exactly the same situation. You had three nations, and you couldn't make any constitutional changes without the consent of all of the nations. All three nations have to agree to any fundamental constitutional change. And Bosnia and Herzegovina becoming independent of Yugoslavia was a very fundamental constitutional change. But what then happened is the Western leaders said, well, we don't give a rat's ass about your constitution. All you need to do is to have a referendum. If the referendum, you get 2/3 vote for secession, we will recognize it. The Serbs said, we're not going to take part in this, for obvious reasons, because they say this is obviously a violation of the constitution. You can't just have a referendum. All three nations have to approve of any constitutional change. But they had the referendum, the Croats and the Muslims voted to secede, and the Western powers recognized it. And that, of course, triggered the war, because the Serbs said, we don't want to have anything to do with this independent Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina. But the Western powers then committed themselves. So they took having first said we can't have the state of Yugoslavia because hey, that's a prison, is a prison of nations. No one wants to be a part of Yugoslavia. Then said, oh, but we must preserve the unity of Bosnia and Herzegovina. It never made the slightest sense. Why don't you want to preserve the unity of Yugoslavia, but you're absolutely determined to preserve the unity of Bosnia and Herzegovina? But anyway, they fought this war in order to deny the Serbs the right for national self-determination. The Serbs naturally said, well, we don't want to be a part of this state. We would much rather be with Serbia. There are co-nationals, want to be a part of that state. No, you can't have that. You have to be part of this state, and we're going to force you to be a part of the state. Well, the only way they could do it is by cobbling together this fake state of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which comprised these two entities that were more or less like, it was like a confederation. You got the very, very weak, non-existent central government. And then with these and then as long as these two entities are still nominally part of Bosnia and Herzegovina, then at least they're not going to be at each other's throats. But for the Western powers, this was, however, an unsatisfactory solution. And ever since the signing of the Dayton Accords, they've tried to strengthen the central government to create this unitary state. And naturally, the Serbs don't want to be a part of it. So this person they talk about, this Bosnian foreign minister, he's one of the Muslims. Which is the other entity. You have these two entities: the Federation of Croats and Bosniaks, or Bosniaks and Croats, which is the majority of whom are Muslims, and then the Republic of Srpska. Now, but so you got this over all of this Bosnia and Herzegovina, presiding over it all, is this Office of the High Representative. This was supposed to be just a temporary thing. He was only going to be there for about a year. And he always seems to be either an Austrian or a German. So the current Office of the High Representative, I think his name is Schmidt, is a German. The guy who preceded him was an Austrian. And all they really ever do is to try to adopt legislation. They could just simply, I don't say legislation, they issued decrees and say everybody has to fall in with the decrees. So the previous Office of the High Representative had issued this decree demanding that Serbs accept responsibility for the genocide of Srebrenica, or that the Serbs stop defending war criminals. Like, they just issue a decree, just that the Serbs naturally don't particularly like it, largely because the evidence that there was genocide in Srebrenica is flimsy, to say the least. And what they call war criminals were actually, leaders of the Serbs, who had fought led the Serbs in that war in Bosnia from 1992 to 1995. Now, overriding all of this is that this Office of the High Representative, so it basically issues these decrees saying that legislation passed by the Republika Srpska, legislation such as, that the land in the Republika Srpska belongs to the Republika Srpska and not to the state of the Bosnia and Herzegovina. This is the kind of legislation that the assembly in the Republika Srpska passed, that the farmland or the industries or ports belong to the Republika Srpska. So he, this office of the High Representative says, no, 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 I cancel this. I'm canceling this legislation. That's a violation of the Dayton Accords. But he does this. So Dodik says, well, you know what? You cancel us, we're going to cancel you. We're not going to recognize your attempts to cancel our legislation. This land belongs to us. The farmland, the ports, the infrastructure belongs to us. Doesn't belong to this fake state of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So he basically said, we're not going to listen to the office of the High Representative. And Dodik, he's an elected leader. Schmidt, Christian Schmidt, the office of the High Representative, no one elected him to anything. He's just a bureaucratic appointee. Worse, he hasn't even been given a mandate by the UN Security Council because the Russians and the Chinese refused to accept him as the office of the High Representative. So when Dodik said, well, we're not going to accept the rulings of Schmidt, so the court in Sarajevo said, well, that's a violation of the law, and we're sentencing him to prison. So they sentenced him to prison. And, Dodik said, well, you can take your prison term and shove it, where the sun don't shine, words to that effect. And this, which is, he's acting entirely in accordance with democracy. He's acting entirely in accordance with the principle of national self-determination, leads these creatures like Priti Patel, who supposedly, she believes in national sovereignty. She goes to these conferences organized by this Hazoni, National Conservatism Sovereignty, and she is ranting and raving, like in the things that I read out. What are you going to do about Dodik? You got to do something about Dodik. Well, why? Why do you have to do anything about Dodik? Why do you have to keep the state going? If the Serbs in this Republika Srpska say, we don't want to be a part of this state of Bosnia and Herzegovina, there's no reason for us to do it. There was never a state called Bosnia and Herzegovina other than this state that you created as a result of the recognition of the secession of the republics from Yugoslavia. You created this fake state, and then through this fake agreement, we don't want to be a part of that. Why is Priti Patel and this guy who's the minister so adamant that the Serbs need to put up with it? Well, that's the international consensus, and all they know how to do is to defy the democratic will of the people and to threaten with force, because that's what they're doing. They're threatening Dodik with force. And what is Dodik's crime? Dodik has said, I'm not going to accept the rulings of the office of the High Representative. Our assembly has adopted legislation making clear what belongs to us. That our land, our farmland, belongs to us. Our ports and infrastructure belong to us. They don't belong to the state of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And yet this guy, Schmidt, simply cancels and says, well, I know better. And I say, this is, I'm canceling it. This law doesn't exist. I don't care that this is a democratically elected assembly that passed this legislation. I don't care. I'm canceling it. And then, and then Dodik said, well, I don't care about you. You don't rule us. And that's what Priti Patel, a national conservative, big sovereign person, Priti Patel. But she's, of course, a big Israel person, which just shows you how much these people really take seriously a conservative principle. Anyway, that's my brief explanation of what this exchange in the Commons is about. Thank you, Shopronka. And then here, Robert. Always good to see you, Robert. Hope things are good I imagine things probably are pretty good in in New Jersey. Anyway, Robert says, as I recall, the use of the legal system to go after political opponents went into high gear with Dominique Strauss-Kahn, who was favored to win the 2012 French presidential election over socialist candidate Hollande. Outlandish charges were made against him, attempting to force a hotel maid to engage in a sex act. The case was ultimately dropped, but not before it ended his political career. Will this be a case with Le Pen, or will they actually uh, trot her off to the home who's grow? The case with Dominic Strauss-Kahn, I mean, I think that was a very. I don't see it as exactly the same. I mean, because what they're doing with Le Pen, I think, is very similar to what they did to Trump and what they did to uh, with Georgescu, which is, you come up with phony baloney criminal charges, cases, charges you've never brought against anyone else. You've just invented it as a way to keep them off the ballot, prevent them from running. In his case, that may well have been a sting, a sexual setup. I mean, those things happen. There's no question. Absolutely, those things happen. But that's not exactly what I would call lawfare. I don't think that was it. Um, However, that was a very strange episode with Strauss-Kahn. So uh, this was in a hotel in New York, and then this maid made all kinds of accusations against him. I mean, that's more. Yeah, that's more. Yeah, I think it's more of a kind of a sexual sting operation, which, where somebody comes onto you and then you scream, "Oh, I was raped," and so on. That happens and has happened many times. So. Why they wanted to do this against Strauss-Kahn, I never quite understood what was behind this. So, but yeah, but it was that's going back a bit. I never liked him very much, so I didn't feel particularly sorry for him. Um, anyway, thank you, Robert. Marty, always good to see you. Merry Tuesday, George and Gaggle. Tuesday. Thank you, Marty, as always, for your generosity. Richard Phillips says it's value-free analysis. If people want emotion and condemnation, maybe watch the mainstream media. Yeah, that's very well put. Yeah, that's very good. Okay, or slop on YouTube. Well, thank you. That's good. I like the way you put that. That's couldn't have put it better myself. Thank you. Robert, it's hard to judge. It depends on how corrupt the French legal system is. Oh yeah, I mean that part about what happens with Le Pen. So the news came out today is that the appellate court said that they will have a decision by the summer of 2026. So in other words, they will make a decision, and so that would still leave time for Le Pen to run in 2027, which is very interesting for them to come out and say that they will have a decision by the summer of 2026. I don't know how they can know that, but I guess that's what they're going to do. But I really don't know. It depends. I mean, obviously, what's happened is a huge embarrassment for France because you basically, I mean, she's leading in the polls. She's a well-known political quantity, and you're saying, well, she's not, she can't run for the presidency. And automatically, even though she hasn't exhausted her appeals, I mean, this is an embarrassment for the French. So I think that even if the appeals court um, confirms the trial court verdict, even then maybe they'll decide. However, we're not going to keep her off the ballot. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, that it's possible that they can confirm the verdict, but not the sentence, or maybe they'll uphold the sentence. I don't know, but so far this is a very bad publicity for France, and given I mean, even if they keep her off the ballot, there's going to be a big vote in favor of the national rally. So even so, if Jordan Bardella is the candidate for president, then pretty much it's going to be it's going to be very hard to defeat him. This is just it's a shot in the arm for Jordan Bardella, and it is similar to what happened in the United States with Trump. I mean, there was just simply a great deal of sympathy for Trump because it's so outrageous that you're going to try and keep him off the ballot. You can't beat him through the vote, so you just simply use the courts in order to keep him off the ballot. It's outrageous, and it shocks, I think, most people's idea of what democracy is about. So that's why, um, if the French elite in the courts decide that we're going to uphold that sentence that she can't run for president, then it all but guarantees that the national rally with Jordan Bardella will win that election, and that Bardella will be president. So they're going to have to make a decision. You know, what's best. You know, have Le Pen run, and maybe she'll win, maybe she won't win, or prevent Le Pen from running and then guarantee that Bardella wins. So, but we'll see. Um, Anne Marie, always very good to see you. Thank you very much, as always, Anne Marie, for your generosity. And Anne Marie says, "Good evening, George and Gagglers. My comment on Mahler is on its way." I'm really looking forward to that. So we in the Gaggle Music Club, we had Mahler's Sixth Symphony, and it's a really great piece of music, and a conductor of the great Claudio Abbado. I always like him, so I'm really looking forward to Anne Marie's comment. That's very very excited by it. So thank you so much, Anne Marie. Richard Phillips, they're trying to take down Sarkozy as well. No, I think so. I mean, it's but Sarkozy, of course, is yesterday's man. But it does seem a very it's something that happens an awful lot in France with these prosecutions of former politicians. So I think Chirac was also prosecuted. It's something that seems to be a regular feature of French life. Chirac was prosecuted. I can't remember whether Giscard was also prosecuted. So it does go on an awful lot in France. Anyway, Stone River, thank you so much, Stone River, for your generosity. Thank you so much. Stone River says, if there was compelling evidence incriminating the authorities in the JFK assassination, why would anyone expect it to be in the government files? You murder the president and then diligently preserve the evidence. I think your logic, I think, is impeccable, and that's why it's always so interesting that people can. This is an ongoing thing of let's uncover these files as if somehow we're going to find the document. There it is. All these years it's been gathering dust. You know, some typewritten letter. You know, okay. I think what you need to do is kill the president. I think November 22nd, 1963, Dallas, probably as good a place as any. Signed Alan Dulles. I don't think we're going to come across with that that document. Yeah, I mean, if the government had been involved, I think they would have any documentation would have been destroyed. But the truth is that the reason why they've been holding back the documents is that, well, it is embarrassing. I mean, they're revealing a lot of very shady, sordid activities that the CIA was involved in, and I think they held them back. The Warren Commission held back these because they didn't want people to entertain dark thoughts about the CIA. I mean, in 1963, people really didn't. I mean, on the left, there were all sorts of suspicions about the CIA, but generally, people still had a positive idea about America's intelligence services. I mean, that gradually changed as the 1960s went on, and then, of course, you had the Church committee hearings in the mid 1970s, and then people learned a great deal more about what the CIA had done. But at the time, you could see why Earl Warren, this pillar of the establishment, should have said, "Well, we don't want all these embarrassing details coming out," and said, "Okay, we're just going to lock everything away." But at this stage, everything that's coming out is pretty much what we knew. We knew that the CIA has all kinds of very sordid connections. We knew that what the CIA had been involved in Cuba and the activities in Cuba. So there's nothing really new about it now. But back then, back in 1964, at the time of the Warren Commission report, you could see why they would want to keep it behind lock and key. But I agree with your logic. I mean, if there were a document, as I say, saying I think we should kill Kennedy, signed Alan Dulles, I think that would have been destroyed some time ago. I also doubt, incidentally, that if Alan Dulles or anyone else had ordered the hit, they would put it down on paper. You just don't, you don't put things like that down on paper. So that's why, anything if it's down on paper, it's unlikely to be terribly incriminating. I mean, these people, professional spies, know enough not to write things down. That's going to be embarrassing later on. So, anyway, thank you so much, Stone River. And let me go back and then. Can't go back. Yeah, so Richard Phillips says, in my humble opinion, just pick a group they don't like and blame them and then create a series and back it up. Brutal reality is nobody knows, nobody will ever know. Well, I think so. I mean, it's like as time has gone on, you always pick on whoever is the favorite villain of the hour. So, as I say, initially the suspicion was that Kennedy was assassinated by these right wingers, these right wing racists from the South. These people who were against Kennedy's civil rights agenda. They were behind it. That was that was suspicion cast on them. Everyone disliked them. They remember from Arkansas and the attempts for the government's attempts to desegregate schools and so on. Then he kind of moved on to the mafia. They became hated, and there was suspicion against the mafia. And then again, the Soviets were kind of an interesting sidelight. I mean, there was obviously. The Soviets were highly vulnerable because of their connection with Oswald, and so that was that took a little bit of time to address that issue, whether the Soviets themselves had been involved. But then you had the CIA, and now the more fashionable one now is the Israelis. Because of Kennedy's objection to Israel's nuclear program. But you notice that Kennedy didn't do anything about it. Yeah, I mean, he was unhappy about it. So was Eisenhower. but he didn't do anything about it, and so it was just one of those things. You keep raising. It's a familiar pattern. You keep raising an issue with the Israelis, and then the Israelis just fob you off, and then what are you going to do? But again, Kennedy wasn't particularly pro-Israeli, but neither neither was Eisenhower, neither was Nixon, but they all accepted Israeli, Israel's pretenses. And so they came up. I mean, this was we posted this that book about the Israel's nuclear weapons, and how they came up with that solution. What are we going to do with this thing? We can't. I mean, we are, the United States. We sponsored this non-proliferation treaty that every country in the world is supposed to sign, and we can't very well be in the business of violating the non-proliferation treaty with Israel. And so they came up with this formula. The formula kind of evolved really from the Kennedy era into the Nixon era, which is, it's like don't ask, don't tell. Israel never admits that it has nuclear weapons. Everybody knows Israel has nuclear weapons, but Israel never admits it, and the United States never asks Israel to admit it. So that way, the United States can pretend that Israel is not in violation of Israel is not a signature of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but Israel is not a nuclear power. So it's a strange sort of thing, because we have the five nuclear powers, the five who everyone knows who they are: France, the UK, the United States, Russia, and China. Then you got India, Pakistan, North Korea, who have all admitted that they have nuclear weapons. And then you have Israel, which we know has nuclear weapons, but Israel has never admitted that it has this. So this was a formula that the Americans, gradually developed over the years, which is, well, we never ask Israel, and Israel never volunteers information, and that's it. We're just going to leave it at that. But it's not a great idea to assassinate the president, and I don't see the motivation just because Kennedy wasn't very happy with what Israel's doing, with the Dimona reactor. Anyway, NKMRD. With Donald Trump's executive orders, we now have the full Arthur Schlesinger memorandum on his reorganization plan for the CIA. Yes, that's right. Well, there might be some indication in that. If there's really a newly released document, sure, I can imagine the CIA pulling it of some helpers. Not so much my topic. No, I mean, I think the Schlesinger memorandum just gives us an idea of what the CIA was up to, and they all knew about this. This organization, this strange entity that came out of World War II, the OSS, and had become quite powerful. But Schlesinger himself had never suggested that the CIA had been involved in the assassination of his hero. Or Sorensen, or any of the Kennedy acolytes and hagiographers. So yeah, I mean, the memorandum is quite interesting, but I don't think we can draw any kind of inferences from that the CIA was involved in this. Anyway, that. And Marty, and Oswald was the lone gunman. Well, I haven't seen any evidence that he wasn't. Um, that all the evidence is that he was there. I mean, you obviously you have all the eyewitnesses, or they thought they heard a shot here and the shot there, and the grassy knoll and everything else. But you have to keep in mind that eyewitnesses are the least reliable sources of evidence. I mean, eyewitnesses get everything wrong because things happen so quickly that they really can't know what really happened. I mean, if you've ever been you witness something and then the police come and ask you what you witnessed, you suddenly find you really aren't sure. Asking, well, did this person come from your left or from your right? Well, I don't know. It all happened so quickly. I'm not sure from which direction he came. Or, did you hear this sound before you heard another sound? Think, well, now I don't know. So eyewitnesses are just not reliable sources of evidence. So, again, you've had all these um, over the years, this eyewitness claimed that he saw something here or something there. That doesn't persuade me. I mean, so it's a nice idea, but and that goes for everything. Whether we're talking about the trials at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia or anywhere else, when you have these eyewitnesses, you suddenly find that they get everything wrong. The moment you probe them, well, you said this in this deposition, then you said something very different in your second deposition, and then in your third deposition, you said something else again, and now you're on the witness stand, and now you've got a fourth version of this story. So which is true? Well, of course, they don't know. They just, they have no idea. And usually they're being led by somebody else, a prosecutor leading the witness. So I haven't seen any evidence that that he wasn't a lone gunman, that there was anyone else with him. Richard Phillips, thank you so much for your generosity. NKMRD says, yeah, I would think the three-letter organization would have had things in control, not being too worried about some vague plans or reorganization. Yeah, exactly. And it never happened. That's the thing, that it never happened. That whole thing about, well, the CIA is going to reorganize. They're not going to do any covert operations. There was no reorganization. They continued to do their covert operations. They continued assassinations. They continued, creating these private armies, and everything, whether it's in Vietnam, the Phoenix program, whether in Laos, whether in Afghanistan, whether it's with the Contras in Central America, the CIA continued with everything. So I mean, it's like, there was no reorganization, and there's no evidence that Kennedy wanted this. The story that Kennedy somehow wanted to reorganize it comes from this comment: I want to break up the CIA into 1,000 little pieces and let the wind blow them away. That people quote this, and there's no evidence at all that Kennedy ever said this. So yeah, there was there were no reforms at the CIA. So Richard Phillips says, "How come these dogs are never seen?" Well, you see them. You don't see them here. You see them on the podcast. They're a ferocious-looking bunch. And Marx 2023 says, "What happened to the free trade market economy? Did it really exist?" No, probably not. I don't think it ever existed. I think countries have tariffs. They impose taxes on imports. America's tariffs are among the lowest in the world. Most countries have much higher tariffs than the United States does. And then even then you have, even if it's not the tariffs, you have all sorts of non-tariff trade barriers. I mean, countries have learned masterfully of imposing all kinds of costs on imports. Oh, you don't fulfill these regulations, you don't fulfill that regulation. You can either keep them out of the market as a result of they don't meet regulation standards, or you can charge them because they don't meet regulation standards. These are known as non-tariff trade barriers. So it's no one's ever really believed there was such a thing as free trade around the world. Right now, people are very upset and are wildly exaggerating everything that Trump is doing. But a lot of it is coming from corporations and finance, Wall Street. Wall Street, which is has no interest. He just wants money coming in. So Wall Street doesn't have a problem with America running a trade deficit, because that money that is goes overseas, that goes to back into Wall Street. So Wall Street, if you believe in financializing the economy, then you're perfectly happy with free trade. Free trade, yeah, that's great. It works. America runs huge trade deficits, and the capital that leaves the country comes back into to Wall Street. So and I think they're the ones who are pushing this hysteria about tariffs. And then Robert says, so what would you say has motivated this revisionist history trying to paint Kennedy as a noble figure in pursuit of a peaceful world? Is this something of a romantic carryover from Jackie's invention of Camelot, when she said to journalist Teddy White soon after the assassination, "Don't let it be forgot that once there was a spot for one brief shining moment that was known as Camelot." Thank you, Robert. That was very, very well put. Don't let it be forgot that once there was a spot for one brief shining moment that was known as Camelot. I think that the hagiography about Kennedy started almost immediately after the assassination. I think there was a national feeling of guilt over his death. There'd been a lot of divisiveness over the years, but prior to the assassination, especially over race and desegregation, and people had attacked Kennedy. No one had thought Kennedy was a particularly good president. That's what people forget. No one really thought he was such a great president. I think he had been really quite a mediocre president. But given that this assassination, which was so shocking, it was seen on television, that somehow there was really an attempt to overcompensate and to present Kennedy as this saintly figure, when there was no evidence for any of that. I think I talked before about that book by Victor Lasky. Victor Lasky had been a member of he was in the old right, very anti-communist. He and Ralph de Toledano, they used to write these very anti-communist books back in the 1950s. But anyway, Victor Lasky wrote this book, JFK, The Man and the Myth, but he wrote this before the assassination. I think it came out sometime in 1963. And, you can see he was extremely underwhelmed and unimpressed by Kennedy's years in power. But somehow, because of this this ending, the shocking ending, along came this hagiography. Now, that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is Kennedy was very smart about public relations. That's why he hired these people like Schlesinger. I mean, why did he give Schlesinger a job? I mean, Schlesinger was a historian. Well, he gave Schlesinger a job because he knew that Schlesinger was going to write these hagiographic books about him at the end of his term in office. I mean, obviously, he didn't know he was going to get killed, but that's why he hired Schlesinger. Then he hires Sorensen. the job of all these people was then to spread the message of the greatness of Kennedy, and that's what they did. And they were the ones who got the books out. They got the first books out about Kennedy immediately. I mean, Schlesinger, A Thousand Days, it came out very quickly after the assassination, and then Sorensen's book, I forgot what the title of that was, also came out very soon after the assassination, and that did shape the public perception. But you're also right about Jackie and the whole glamour of Jackie and so on, and boom, there was just the mythology that was created around him, and it's hard to convey today how obnoxious it was, because to people who remembered the Kennedys, who remembered really the kind of mediocre presidency, remembered his dad, and how his dad made money, and all of that, and then this hysteria that went on and on through the Johnson years and to the Nixon years, or somehow this glorious, wonderful young leader, Americans had been robbed of him, and so the myth was created that somehow Kennedy, was intended to withdraw from Vietnam. Again, this was just totally made up, absolutely made up. That Kennedy was planning on withdrawing from Vietnam. The man who did the most to put that story out was Schlesinger. Schlesinger was the one who just used a few observations from Kennedy that he intended to withdraw from Vietnam. The problem for Schlesinger was that when the Pentagon Papers came out, so Schlesinger's book comes out, I guess 1964, and the Pentagon Papers, that's in 1970. The Pentagon Papers showed the extent of Kennedy's involvement in the overthrow and assassination of South Vietnamese President Ngo Dinh Diem. Once that happened, once Diem was overthrown and assassinated, then essentially you own this war. You can't walk away from it. If you could have walked away from it before the Diem assassination. I don't think Kennedy would have done so, but at least you could walk away from it and say, we don't like Diem. He's not our cup of tea. He's more, he's a French guy. He doesn't really like the Americans. The Americans don't like him. He's a Catholic. He's just not someone we can work with. We're going to walk away. But once you go ahead, you plot the overthrow. He's assassinated, and South Vietnam just absolutely collapses following his overthrow, which was, of course, inevitable. Anyone could have predicted that would happen. Then it's like the Pottery Barn theory. You bought it, you broke it, you own it, and you pay for it. And therefore, there was, once that happened, there was no way the Americans could walk away from Vietnam. And Kennedy, it was Kennedy, not even Johnson. It was Kennedy who was absolutely up to his eyes in the plotting that overthrew Diem. And that was in the Pentagon Papers. So it was unfortunate for Schlesinger that the Pentagon Papers kind of put the lie to his fabulous story that somehow Kennedy was planning to withdraw from Vietnam. Richard Phillips says, what dogs are they? They can't be big dogs. 4 would cost a fortune. They're not big dogs, but the thing about dogs is that, when they're in the pack, they're quite ferocious. It's like when you see wild dogs in Africa and they surround a lion. Individually, a lion can easily crush one wild dog. A lion can probably crush 2 wild dogs. But when you've got a pack of wild dogs, then the odds shift in favor of the wild dogs. And the lion, once they surround him, the lion can't really escape, and they will kill the lion. So the point is the pack of dogs. That's what I have to deal with. Anyway, Marx 2023 says, bad news. George Peters growing the pack He's adding a Excel bully dog. You know what I mean? Anyway, thank you so much, Rox. Yeah, it could be right there. Richard Phillips says the EU have finally sent their minions after George. Yeah, no, thank you. Ursula von der Leyen, who, as we know, runs a dungeon that she, this ferocious dominatrix runs this dungeon. I think she's been after me for quite a while, so I'm always very nervous that one day I'm going to end up in one of her dungeons. And then Richard Phillips says, "Well, if he doesn't feed that, then he's dead for sure." Yeah, that's right. And then Richard says, "George is an academic is bound to be toy dogs like Peter's Chihuahua." Yeah, I think you're right. They are toy dogs, but when they're together, they're not. You don't mess with them. That's the problem because they kind of encourage each other in their ferocity. That's why then they look at the tip jar, and when they feel that the tip jar isn't moving in the appropriate direction, then they take it out on me. They say it's clearly my fault that that's not happening. So, um, and and then Richard first says Pretty Patel, more like pretty stupid. Yeah, that's very good. Pretty Patel. Yeah, she was also the one. She was the one who was basically on the Israeli payroll. It's interesting that she still has a political career. I wouldn't have thought so, but they basically had her dead to rights. She was clearly she was on the Israeli payroll. She had to resign from the government. Was it Cameron was the prime minister? She had to resign because she was obviously um, she was working with the Israelis without really telling Cameron that she was working for the Israelis, and so she had to resign. But she's still in Parliament. She's still asking her ridiculous questions. Yeah, and then Robert says Pierre Salinger would be another such PR motivated hire. Yeah, no, Salinger was very much that. Yeah, Salinger. He was the press secretary for Kennedy. He's very much like that's right. It was that group of Schlesinger, Sorensen, Salinger, and even others, like Galbraith. Galbraith also worked for Kennedy and then once Kennedy was gone, they all wrote their books, with singing his praises, and then these characters in particular. They didn't work for Johnson, and they immediately moved over to Bobby and started pushing Bobby Kennedy's candidacy. Right away essentially they treated Johnson as a usurper, and they began preparing the rise of Bobby. So, but not Galbraith. Interesting enough, Galbraith actually supported Eugene McCarthy in 1968 rather than Bobby. So that's but but these characters, that's it. They devoted the rest of their lives to the fantasy that America missed its glorious chance of Kennedy. They lost with somehow, and America can never recover from the loss of Kennedy. Anyway, I've gone on for a while. Thank you, everybody who has joined me. I really appreciate it. Thank you for spending time. Anne Marie, really looking forward to your observations about Mahler. In fact, I can't wait to hear what you have to say about Mahler. If you haven't listened, go to the Gaggle locals page. Listen to Mahler's Sixth Symphony, conducted by the one and only the late Claudio Abbado. Also on the locals page, the Spy Who Came In From the Cold, one of the great movies, one of the best Cold War movies ever made. So there it is. You join the Gaggle locals group, and you can see this movie. And of course all the wonderful postings and everything else. Anyway, Thank you for today. We'll be back on Thursday, the same time. Look forward to it. See you then. All the best. Good night. See you. Bye bye.